from the shores of beautiful Lake Coeur d'Alene in the heart of North Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discuss their topics on our forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum. With your host and moderator, political scientist, Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the 11th program that is titled a special series, Journey Through Time, What Happened in the Western World in the Second Millennium. On this rather long series, which will end next week, we're delighted to welcome to our program famous people in history portrayed by individuals who have studied them for many months and in some cases years. On today's program, I'm very pleased to have two guests, and I want to pause to say thank you to the Idaho Humanities Council, the Associated Students of North Idaho College, and the North Idaho College Foundation for funding over the past 4 years that have made the series that we're doing a very special part of North Idaho College. On today's program, we're welcoming to 1999 two very famous people in history. First of all, our guest will be Adam Smith and Susan B. Anthony, and on next week we'll have three more famous people for our final program in this particular series. Adam Smith lived from 1723 until 1790. He's admired very much, as today we would call him an economist, by the capitalism and by those who support what we call the free enterprise system. He's very much known today as a supporter of the laissez-faire program and wrote the book, The Wealth of Nations, among other things. Mr. Adam Smith, welcome to North Idaho College, 1999, and thank you for coming to visit with us from the past.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I equally welcome Susan B. Anthony, and Miss Anthony lived from 1820 until 1906. She's often called the mother of the suffrage movement, America's best-known suffragette, and she spoke all over the country on behalf of women's issues. She's also interested in the temperance movement, abolition, and so Miss Anthony, welcome to 1999 at North Idaho College, and thank you for visiting from the past.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Smith, I'm going to start the program today with you. I've used some terms already that were not in your book or in your other publications, but certainly as time has evolved and your work has been appreciated by others, we have attached those terms to you. Would you start out the program by telling us what was at the heart of your theory and your work? What did you believe about what we call today economics?
Well, Tony, I would like to say that, as you mentioned, that the word economics did not even exist when I was writing my book. Anything in economics at that time was referred to as political economy. And what I intended to do when I started writing my book was to bring to the forefront, which had never been done before, the basics of the nation, of the national and international economy, which had never, at that time, had never been talked about. There was no study of economics at the time. And I thought it had become, because this was during the age of enlightenment in Europe, and because of that, and because of the blooming economy at the time, that I felt that it should be brought to the forefront and be made visible to everyone so that they could ascertain what was happening in the economic world at the time.
What did you do in your works that so drew attention? I guess I can back up and ask it this way. Were there things going on in what we would call the economy that you were unhappy about, other movements that would be opposite to what you advocated? Of course, some things would happen long after your life that would be a counter to your economics, such as the works of economics that became known as communism or Marxism and all of that. But what influence? You have to answer this question without some future history that you would not know about. But what were you trying to accomplish? What were you trying to influence people to do?
Well, one of the main things that I was trying to get in front of the people and to the governments of the time was governments were very repressive. And there has been a mistake in recent years, from what I have learned in coming back to this time, that I was opposed to any type of government or laws or restrictions, and that is not true. The fact is that it would be absolutely idiotic for anyone to assume that a civilization, any civilization, can exist without certain controls among the populace. And there were so many things that were going on at the time that were restrictive of the working class of people. And I certainly was opposed to that type of thing that was happening to them. And I tried to present that in my book, In Wealth of Nations, that the people, the ordinary working people, was really the so-called backbone of the economy. And they were, at that time, they were being taken advantage of by the upper classes. And
the monarchical systems and all.
And this did disturb me, yes, that this was happening.
One more question, and I'll go to Ms. Anthony and come back to you later. But again, I'm living in a different time, and it's difficult to communicate about where you were and where we are today. But would it be fair to say that from your works that you had a belief that both the worker and the owner of production, the companies, should not be totally free from government regulation, but they should have a lot of freedom in the marketplace to pursue their economic interests?
That is true, Tony, and that it has been credited. I have been credited with originating what has been termed a laissez-faire government or type of economy. And I did not use that in my book. This was something that was given to it later. And but I do agree with what it advocated. And the fact is that what this means typically is, and from my viewpoint, that government stand aside, not interfere in the marketplace. And now, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be some certain types of government restrictions, and this was never my intention to portray it that way. But I don't think that governments should attempt to regulate the marketplace and the economy. It has been tried was tried in many areas prior to that time, but almost invariably ended in an abject failure.
Well, thank you. Susan B. Anthony, we also want to be able to tap your wisdom, your experience, and your knowledge while you come to this point to visit with us. I'll start this way. You have been recorded in history as a famous person, as the other guest is. What did you do in your lifetime, which is a long life for your time, 86 years, that has given you such a place in history? What do you think you did that made a great difference? We've been inviting guests on these programs from the past because they did something in that 1,000-year period that made a real difference in humanity. Would you speak to that?
Yes, I'd love to. I worked very hard to raise awareness that women had a right, they had the intelligence to be a part of the political system. I believe in the United States political system. I think it can make wonderful strides towards making everyone's life a better place, but women have been left out of this system. And I traveled all over the country, even abroad, to get people aware, and women specifically, that they have the right to vote, they have the intelligence to vote, and they need to have these laws passed. We need to pass an amendment to allow this practice to happen.
And you were a person of courage and fortitude, and you spoke out. Tell us a little bit more about how you went around the country speaking. How did you bring the attention of this issue to so many people? And you organized people to protest their condition, women of the time.
Yes, women were basically owned at the time by their fathers and then later by their husbands and by their government, and this was absolutely unacceptable to me. It started out, I went to a temperance meeting, and I was very interested in limiting and abolishing the alcohol abuses of the time, but I was told to sit in the back and not speak, and I knew then I had a different cause that I must pursue. I went all over the country. I would trudge through the snow. Most of my time was spent walking. I did a lot of it by foot. Once I would get to the specific cities, I would walk everywhere, and later on I would be given rides, but I did build up quite a few muscles. I would arrange the places where there were meetings. We would meet in people's houses, we would meet in churches, we would meet in barns, and we would talk to the people and speak to them, and I really didn't feel that I was capable of motivating people, but I found out later.
What were some of the points that you made at those meetings? What did you say? And there's some men that also supported the cause very much so, but the women that were finding themselves controlled and oppressed, what message did you say to them? I know from history that a lot of great women joined the cause, but some women never did, and some people are more willing to accept oppression. So what did you do to arouse the attention?
Yes.
What were the words did you use?
Well, one of the main things that I would loved announcing was we were allowed to raise their children, even the boys, and educate them, and that we were capable of doing that and forming them into these great human beings. Yet, how could we do that if we were not good human beings ourselves? How could we be possibly allowed this precious time in their lives of such formidable years and not ourselves have the capability of understanding what was going on, of giving them moral character if we did not have it ourselves? And that was one of the big pushes that I would use.
Protests in different times in history take different forms. Sometimes they're set-ins, economic boycotts, different things. One of your protests was to absolutely demand that you would vote. I guess you were in your 50s at the time that you did this. Wasn't it about 1872?
Yes, it was.
Tell us what you did and what happened to you because of this activism that you took on in relation to voting.
Well, a dear suffragette had mentioned that the amendments of 14 and 15 had been passed, and we were quite upset that they actually used the word male citizen in there. And we initially believed that absolutely excluded us by law. But for the rest of the amendments, it said that all citizens, and it went on to say, had the right, and no state could deny this right. And it was brought to our attention, and we decided that we would entertain this thought. And we were just mulling it around when I saw an ad that said, "You must register to vote now. It's your duty." And it went on to implore everybody to do what people had died and fought for. And so about 14 of us went in and registered, and we brought in the 14th and 15th Amendments to prove that we did have the right to register, and the poor registrars could not deny us. And then the next day we went in and we voted also. So.
But what happened to you after you voted?
Oh yes, well, on Thanksgiving Day, which was a very new holiday at the time, we were arrested in our homes and brought down to the courthouse for a trial, well, for a hearing. And when we finally went to trial later, basically I went to trial. I was the key case, and I was not allowed to say one word in my defense. I had checked with a lawyer, and he was a judge at one time for an appeals court, and he looked over the amendment and thought that we had a right and that he would help me fight for it if something came up, which we were pretty sure would. And he fought nobly for me in the courtroom, but the judge had already decided. And in fact, when it was time for the jury to go out and decide, he told them that he'd made the decision and told them how they were demanded to vote. And then he did not even poll the vote and pass the sentence. I was fined $100, and I stood up in the court. And at that time, I owed quite a bit of money from my Revolution paper. And I paid back every cent of the $10,000 that I owed on the Revolution, but I never paid one dime of the $100. And I told the judge that I would not. And they never ended up putting me in jail to claim that fine, because they knew that I would then be allowed an appeal, and that might not work too well for them.
So it's never been paid?
Never. Oh, no.
And while you've returned in 1999, you have no intention of paying it?
Absolutely not.
Another issue that I would like to bring up, along with yourself, another very famous person in the movement was Elizabeth Stanton. I know you were friends. Correct me if I'm wrong, a lot later time in history, but one of the things that we read about the two of you is that not only were you both very effective, but that you had somewhat different talents, that you were the spokesperson that was out most often speaking on the issue, and although she would do that too, but she was more of the organizer. Oftentimes there's a team of the person who espouses the views and rallies the people, and the other one is the nuts and bolts organizer. Is that somewhat of a fair comparison of the two of you and your role in the women's movement?
Yes, Mrs. Stanton was a wonderful partner and a great friend. She wrote most of the speeches, and then I would go out and deliver them. She was a wonderful motivator on paper, and she could speak well also. She carried down the nuts and bolts, as you would say, and I would go and fire the hammer. I would play with her children and allow her the time to write, and then I would go off. She was stuck at home a lot. She had a lot of home obligations.
She had, how many children did she have?
She had 7 children.
And you did not marry, is that correct?
No, I never married.
And so you were more free to go, and she had to stay home and have obligations, but still work from that perspective.
Yes, and we corresponded all the time.
Yes. Ms. Smith, back to you for a few minutes. In relation to your publications and your work, your writings, your speaking, and so forth, what do you think caused you to be so motivated? I've been asking this question for several weeks on the program now. All of you, as I've studied about your life, were set aside from the average citizenry. Part of your uniqueness as people in history is that you've left such an impact. And I want to know, if I could please, what motivated you to do all that you did, that you've been recognized for. It's kind of an involved question, but it's a compliment to you. You were not just average in your daily life and your work. Could you share with us the secret of being able to contribute that way to humanity?
Well, one of the things that I attribute this most to was when I was attending the University of Glasgow, that I had an instructor there named Francis Hutchinson, who had the most effect upon my life than any person. He became my mentor, and I followed his principles mostly through all of my life. And because I think that was the biggest motivation that I had, was the teachings and the learnings that I got from him. And frankly, I was very surprised that when I returned here, that because I wrote a book previous to The Wealth of Nations, which I felt at the time that I really was more proud of myself than The Wealth of Nations, and that was the sentiments, the theory of moral sentiments, and that was based upon the things that I had learned from Francis Hutchinson. As it turned out, of course, that and it was a wide read book at the time, but as it turned out, of course, The Wealth of Nations became the more widely read and the more lasting. After coming here, I find that no one is aware of the theory of moral sentiments that I wrote, and now that, and that was where I got the motivation from, and again, going back to the times that was happening, and it was the beginning of the what today would be called the assembly line, and what I termed in my book was called a division of labor, and this principally amounted to when manufacturing any product, that it was not done by one person, it would be done by several people, and later on was advanced quite considerably in the revolution that happened in your country. But this was one of the things that really appealed to me, and one of the things that I tried to express in my book, to really get into the system, the political system, the economic system, and get it advanced, and which I thought was one of the greatest things of my book.
So this teacher and mentor, I think I can say, in our time we would use the word mentor, sparked your interest, gave you a lot of ideas, and from that you learned that teamwork and the workplace is as important as it is in other parts of life.
That is correct. Francis Hutchinson Dr. Hutchinson was a former Presbyterian minister.
Well, that would combine your two works that you did there, wouldn't it? Explain both the moral questions and the economic questions.
That's exactly right. And he had such profound influence on me that it just lasted me throughout my life.
Okay. And did he also give you this, also you had a work ethic to put all that time in?
He certainly did. He impressed that upon me, and of course, being a minister or previous minister as he was greatly concerned about the status of the working people, and this is one of the things that I tried to influence into my book was the fact that profits should be shared by the capitalist who originated it, and the workers who carried out the progress of the work that was done.
Well, thank you. And in our times, the youth can really gain some things from you here about the work ethic and having a thought-out philosophy and all of that. I'm going to return to Susan B. Anthony. Miss Anthony, we've mentioned briefly that you had attended temperance meetings, but you were very upset with the fact that women didn't have a role, and then you went more back into the women's movement. But you also had certainly viewed and looked at the abolitionist movement and what had happened in that. Can you weave some kind of understanding there? What I want to give you that same question is, I just am trying to get to the essence of what makes great people like you tick, what makes you function, what sets you apart. I suppose at the time you're doing your work, one is so close to the situation, you don't realize that you're going to be recognized as the kind of contributor you are. But can you give us an insight, as Mr. Smith did, about, was it certain people in your life, was it injustices? What caused you to do what you did with that kind of magnitude of effect?
I did see injustices, not only towards in the abolitionist movement. Everyone should have the right to choose their destiny.
You had a passion for this.
A passion for this. I really wanted to help people affect changes in their own life. I feel that the right to vote could really give them the choices, help them band together and create the changes that their specific groups need to make their lives more productive.
Was there anyone in your life that had helped you come to that kind of philosophy, members of the family or others? My
father had a great influence on me, and when I came home from that temperance meeting after being told that I was not allowed to speak, that I was a woman, I actually wept on his lap and said, I have to go and do the work of the suffrage movement. I need to be a part of this, and he gave me his blessing. And he had always been one who would speak out for the good and the right of all people.
Thank you. Time goes so fast. We're almost out of time. I'm going to take you out of character now. I think our audience, our viewers appreciate that. I'll introduce you first as Vivian Ward. I'm delighted to say that you have been a student at North Idaho College. I've had you in class. I recognize your great talent and ask you if you would do this, and thank you so much for doing it. Vivian, and you're going on now to another institution of higher learning. What has this meant to do this role? How's it changed your life?
She was such a determined and strong individual. She saw what she wanted and she went after it full bore, and even took a piece of it, by going and voting when she was told no. And I wish I had that kind of courage, and I certainly attempt that kind of courage since I've studied about her.
With the fact that you have had that admiration, we have difficult times in our life. Will this give you extra strength?
I often think of her when I come up against something difficult. The most difficult thing I'm doing now is I'm running Bloomsday, and I know I'm going to think about her when I'm on Doomsday Hill. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop.
That is really helpful to us. I also want to introduce Hugh Smith. You truly are Smith. In this case, Hugh Smith rather than Adam Smith. And I want to say to our viewers that after you had a long career and a successful one, and when you retired, you came here to North Idaho College and became a student. Again, I had the pleasure of having you in class and recognized all your talents. And you went on to graduate from Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho. Hugh, tell us, too, what this has meant to you.
Well, Tony, I suppose that every person that's been to college was familiar with the name Adam Smith, but very few people knew anything about Adam Smith, including myself. I knew that he wrote The Wealth of Nations, but I was not really familiar with what it was about. I knew that it was about the economics.
We have just about 20 seconds, and so how's it affected you in that way of learning about him?
Well, the fact is that I learned so much from it that it's very difficult to put it down in 20 seconds. But it really influenced my thinking toward the government not trying to regulate the marketplace.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to be with us again next week at the same time, and we'll conclude this series, The Journey Through Time, that we've enjoyed so much bringing to you. And I've enjoyed our guests much today and the people who played those roles of some really famous people in history. I hope you've enjoyed as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. Until next week, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum is the longest-running public television show of its type in North America and is seen in 7 states and 2 Canadian provinces. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational community outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another new edition of North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.